Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
So, when I was 15, I was diagnosed with bipolar schizophrenia. Now, despite what TV shows and movies portray it, not all schizophrenics are serial killers. If you can keep your medication in balance, you can live a perfect, normal life. From the age of 15 to 20 was rather hard as we tried to form the right balance and medication for me. But it's been 11 years since I was first diagnosed and has been 6 years since I had any real bad symptoms. There have been a few minor issues when my meds will go out of balance, but nothing too extreme. Anyways, this happened 3 years ago. I had just moved into a new apartment with 2 new roommates. We will call them Zach and Rachel. Yes, those are their real name, cause screw them. Anyways, due to my illness, I take multiple medications, antipsychotic, antidepressants, and anti-anxiety medication to name a few. These are all rather strong medication. So when I moved in and got settled in, I started to notice some of my meds start go missing. I have my pills counted out and ready, so I know exactly how many I have. I immediately suspected my roommates as they were the only ones with access to my room. I also knew for a fact that they took other medications to get high. They were pretty open about it, but I had no proof, and didn't want to risk pissing them off as I had to live with them. So I looked past it, hoping it was a one-time thing. But it wasn't. After a few days of this, I lost it and confronted them. They denied it, and of course I had no proof. I even got a lock for my room, but somehow they still managed to get in. So here is where the revenge starts. So due to all my medication, I get constipated a lot. So I have a very strong laxative I take when this happens. They are tiny pinkish pills. If you don't know about medication, you could easily mistake these for something else. One morning before heading to work, I took my antipsychotic pill bottles and switched out the pills for my laxatives. And then I left. When I came home that evening, both my roommates were in the washrooms. I asked Rachel what was wrong and she made up some crappy food poisoning excuse. They spent the whole night in and out of the bathrooms. My medications stopped disappearing after that night. I've just been assigned online refresher training in preparation for the reopening of the pub company I work for now that COVID lockdown has been relaxed. It reminded me of my revenge a few years back, so I thought I'd share. The training included sections on pest management and anti-bribery legislation. I used to be a pub manager, and due to the sale of the pub I managed, I chose to accept a new pub with my current company instead of transfer of undertakings to the new company. For the non-UK readers, it means I chose to move within a company instead of being sold with the site. It was a big mistake. I ended up in a problem pub with an awful micromanaging, corrupt area manager who had it in for me. Many stories I could tell about how bad she was, from allowing food hygiene laws to be broken, taking bribes to make us stock certain brands, to having affairs with managers in her area and favoring them. Eventually, it exacerbated the mental health issue I have, and I had a total mental breakdown. 4 months off sick, close to being sectioned and put in a facility against my will for my own safety. I wasn't the first of her managers that ended up off with mental health issues due to her either. Eventually, I took a voluntary demotion for the sake of my own health and to get out of her area. Best decision I have ever made. Money isn't everything, and I'm in a much better place mentally now. Shortly after I started back at work, I heard she had left our company. Rumor was she was told to jump or be pushed. Scroll for a year or so, and I was out with a friend having a catch-up in another pub chain, and I saw her sitting down with someone going through paperwork at another table. It looked to me like she was having a meeting with the pub manager, so I asked one of the floor staff who she was, saying I thought I recognized her. They said she was the area manager having a meeting with the pub manager. My revenge. Knowing her, I guessed she was probably doing the same things with a new company she worked for, so I anonymously put in a whistleblower complaint to both the Food Standards Agency and also to her head office from a throwaway email. I basically made stuff up assuming she was doing the stuff she had done when I worked for her, i.e. refusing to allow rent-a-kill call-outs for pest problems to make her maintenance budgets look good, telling staff to refreeze unsold defrosted foods to save on stock loss, taking bribes to stock products, making managers clock staff out before they had finished to cut staff hours, and so on and so on. All stuff she had tried to make me do, and when I wouldn't, she'd used her powers to screw me over. She couldn't discipline me for not breaking the law, but she could screw with my bonus and put me through hell in other ways. The fallout. The pub was closed with a prohibition notice and not allowed to reopen until a multitude of faults were fixed. Unless an outlet is really, usually they will give out improvement notices and give the company 2 weeks to sort things out. A prohibition notice means it was really bad and dangerous. This hit the local press in a big way, and they did several follow-up stories on it, with her name mentioned frequently as it went to court. Unfortunately, I can't seem to find anything about the final outcome though. Here is hope in any future job she goes for Googles her name before employing her. Personally, I wish I could find that she was locked up or fined. It was just another Tuesday afternoon and I found myself in a seemingly endless line at the local grocery store. The store was buzzing with the usual crowd of shoppers, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary until she arrived. For the sake of the story, let's call her Karen. Karen was her high heels clacking against the tiled floor, her sunglasses perched arrogantly on her head, seemed to believe that the rules of the ordinary folk didn't apply to her. As I shuffled forward, inching closer to the cashier, my attention was drawn to a commotion at the back of the line. Karen, with a dismissive flick of her hand, was attempting to bypass a few customers, mumbling something about being in a hurry. Her eyes were fixed on a gap just ahead of her, right behind a young pregnant woman who I later learned was named Jessica. Jessica was visibly in her third trimester, seemed too absorbed in her phone to notice Karen at first. However, it wasn't long before Karen's impatience got the better of her, and she decided to cut right in front of Jessica, muttering a barely audible "excuse me." The line shuffled forward again, and as I moved up, I could hear Jessica addressing Karen. "Excuse me, but there was a line here. I am 7 months pregnant and standing patiently. It would be nice if you could do the same," Jessica said, her tone polite but firm. Karen turned around, her face contorting into a mask of disdain. "Really? Because you're pregnant, you own the world? I have places to be," she snapped. The tension was palpable, and a few of us in a line exchanged awkward looks. No one expected what came next. "If I weren't pregnant, I would show you what's up. But luckily for you, I am," Jessica retorted. That comment seemed to trigger something in Karen. Her face reddened, and she took a menacing step towards Jessica. "You think you're tough? Pregnant or not, I'll show you," Karen shouted, raising her hand threateningly. What happened next was like a scene from a dramatic movie. Karen lunged forward, aiming a direct kick at Jessica's pregnant belly. It was clear she intended to hit her. Gasps echoed around the store as everyone watched in horror. But before Karen's kick could reach Jessica, a large man, who had been standing a few people behind in line, sprang into action. With a speed that belied his size, he grabbed Karen by the waist, pulling her back. The entire line seemed to hold its breath as he wrestled her into a hold, keeping her arms pinned to her side. "Enough, you're not hurting anyone today," he bellowed. Karen struggled, her face twisted in rage, but the man was too strong. The rest of us, we were frozen. It didn't take long for the store security to arrive at the scene. They had been alerted by one of the cashiers and came rushing in. Seeing the situation, they quickly assessed Karen, still held by the large man, and took over, restraining her with professional ease. "Thank you," Jessica whispered to the man. "You might have saved my baby." The store manager apologized to Jessica and the rest of us, assuring that such behavior wouldn't be tolerated. Police arrived shortly after, having been called by the security team. Karen, still shouting obscenities, was taken away in handcuffs after Jessica decided to press charges. The aftermath of the incident was a mix of quiet conversations and shaken customers. Jessica, supported by some of the women from the line, was seated and given water. And as the line slowly started moving again, the reality of what had just occurred began to sink in. I found myself reflecting on the courage shown by both Jessica and the man who intervened. I really hope that Karen rot in jail this time. My neighbor started parking on a street behind my car, like literally inches for no apparent reason. My neighbor has a driveway, empty, and also lives 2 houses down the street. I don't have a driveway, so on-street parking is a must for me. So after a few weeks, I asked if it was necessary to park so close when there were literally no cars on the street for over a quarter mile. He said no, but there is no law against it, with a big annoying grin on his face. A few weeks pass by, and my car gets hit because someone thought there was enough room to clear as his truck blocked the view of my car entirely. I see this happen, but unfortunately can't get a model or license plate number. I found my neighbor's email address because I really didn't feel like talking to him and asked him again if he could just park further down the road closer to his house. He replied, "Nope, suck on it." Okay, I had lived here for quite a long time and never had any issues with him or any other neighbor. I keep to myself, never make noise, don't have any noisy pets or parties and so on. His truck has his business name on it. I googled it and found out it's his own business. Lots of Yelp reviews, BBB ratings, and so on. All these links point to his website. I go to check his website and it doesn't load up. I head over to Who's and see that the domain isn't registered. I snag it. Before I think of what to do with it, I Google the owner's name and found out he's been convicted of murdering a child 20-ish years ago. I find a handful of links that detail his story rather explicitly. I copy-paste all those links into an email to him, a throwaway account so he can't just reply, as I deleted it afterward. I said something like, "Well, if you want to be a jerk for no reason, just bought your business domain. Here's all the links I plan on posting it on it. I don't have to list your business name because all of your business listings across the internet have this URL pointing to it. Keep parking like a jerk. Yes, it's legal, but you are willfully doing this just to annoy me. I legally bought your domain and can legally link these articles. Park behind me again, and I will launch it." Within an hour, his truck was moved into his driveway. He asked me for the domain, and I told him, "When either you move or I move, I'll hand it over. Until then, it'll remain offline." P.S. This happened last week, not a few years ago. He was originally charged with capital murder, but his lawyer convinced him of a plea deal for manslaughter because they have way more than enough to convict you of capital murder. Sort of a story of 2 generations worth of revenge. Long one. Last year, Thanksgiving, a group of us were together and a 30-something couple were talking about how much they were screwing over the owner of their soon-to-be new house. They had negotiated back and forth for a low price, had asked for several contingencies, had nickel and dimed every last thing they could out of the inspection, and at one point the new owner had even threatened to walk away from the deal. They were pretty proud of their tactics and how great their realtor was. One of the over 55 people finally laughed and said, "You aren't going to come out ahead like you think you are. There are consequences for your actions, trust me. The seller always wins." She then told the story of her first house. She and her husband saved and scraped for years before they were able to buy a 100-year-old fixed-upper. This was in the 1990s and interest rates were higher. They were bought during a seller's market. A major employer in their town closed/relocated. The town was plunged into a recession. No jobs, people moved away, and housing prices dropped. 4 years later, she and her husband are getting a divorce. It is now a buyer's market. Their house sits on the market for over a year. Finally, they get an offer. The buyer's realtor was related to them and was a shrew. The offer was less than what they paid for the house, and they had made several costly upgrades. The buyer tried asking for several changes and cash back at closing. After they did the inspection, they kept demanding for things to be done. They started with all the lower cost things, new smoke detectors, snaking a drain, and every 2 to 3 days, it was something else they wanted done. Finally, she and her husband had to tell her realtor they had no money left. They couldn't afford what the buyer was asking for, and they had no choice but to let the buyer out of the contract. The buyer backed out the repairs, but then wanted a couple pieces of furniture that were family antiques. When that didn't work, they wanted a lower price. She and her ex were about one step from a nervous breakdown and were convinced the buyers would walk. She told a few more stories about how the buyers and the inspector were late for an hour for the inspection. They brought their dogs in the house. She was very allergic. The dogs peed and pooped in an area that had new carpets and so on. She lived in a state where buyers and sellers all meet around a table in a lawyer's office for closing at the same time. Roughly an hour before that meeting, the sellers and realtor do a final walkthrough. The night, early morning while it was still dark. Before closing, she dumped around 100 gallons/30 pounds of salt water on the grass and bushes. She turned down the temperature on the water heater. She replaced toilet paper rolls with almost empty ones. The next morning, she and a very good friend sat a half a block away and waited for them to finish the inspection. Once they left, the friend went into the house. She waited a few minutes and drove to the closing. The new owners were about 10 minutes early to the signing, and she was about 5 minutes late. She was very slow about signing the papers and a couple of times asked to have things repeated. While she was signing things, her friend was removing a couple of boards in the attic and adding a mama mouse and her new letter to the attic. He also removed some lattice work and threw a termite's nest under the front porch. Then he sprayed some sugar water around the coal chute, an exterior basement/cellar entrance. Even she knew turning down the temperature on a water heater was pity, but she also hoped that even the one cold shower would start their day off lousy. She moved out of the area, but a year later, when she was visiting, the grass had not recovered. She noticed the attic windows had all been replaced and a couple of old huge trees were trimmed back. 3 days later, there was a new front porch. This was an old house with a wraparound front porch, so no cheap fix. She later heard the people who bought the house lost it through bankruptcy in less than 5 years. Fast forward to this year at Thanksgiving, we were smaller in number, but the same couple was there. They were a bit deflated, while the previous owners didn't do anything quite as bad as a woman in her 50s. It was a pretty tight-knit neighborhood. All of the neighbors had heard blow-by-blow details of their negotiation tactics. They were very cool to them upon meeting, and even a year later, they don't feel very welcome. The neighbors will gather in the street and visit. Now some distancing. Whenever they try to walk over and join the conversation, the group breaks up. You don't think it's fair that the neighborhood kids don't play with their kids. One of the more blunt neighbors told the husband, "Your child is welcome to play with my kids in my house, but I don't want my kids around you." They are considering moving again. They aren't bad people, but it reminded me that buying a house may be a business transaction. But like the woman said, there's consequences for every action. You see, I used to work for a large retail company that sells electronics. We will call them Schmarish Electronics. Sure, and seriously, if you work for them, I'm sorry, and I recommend you find a new job that will actually get you somewhere in life. Anyway, if you don't know how it works at Schmarish, if you are a salesperson, more specifically in the audio/video department, you are paid one of two ways. You are either paid in commission, so as long as your sales are equal enough to make it to minimum wage pay rates, or if you cannot make enough sales to reach minimum wage rates, you are cushioned by being paid minimum wage exactly. To explain a little nicer, say minimum wage at $300 for 1 week of work, but I ended up making $600 in sales. Well, that's all fine and well, I'll get paid $600. But then say the next week I didn't make that much and only did $250 in sales, well, they would just pay me $300 instead. Now, I know what you're thinking. Oh, that seems nice. What's the problem with that? The problem was, or at least in my case back in the day when I used to work for them, if your sales didn't get up above minimum wage for 3 weeks in a row, you were immediately terminated. This means slow months, when there were no holidays or big doorbuster sales, were a teeth grinder. You'll be checking your sales report every 5 minutes to make sure you at least had a penny over what you need to be safe for the next few weeks. I was generally alright with my sales, but the management in this place, or at the very least, the supervisors, were big jerks. They were also paid differently. A supervisor was paid an hourly wage, well above the minimum, mind you, and they had commission stacked with their hourly wage. So as you can expect, there were a lot of sales snipers and stolen sales by our supervisors. A sales sniper is what my coworkers and I called it when a supervisor would target and lock on anyone who was dressed a little bit nicer and rush over to them as fast as possible to try and force them into a sale. Now that we're all caught up, this is where my story starts. I had a supervisor who was in all ways the worst human being in the history of ever. Okay, there was Stalin and Hitler, but he's maybe top 10 then. Anyway, to give context on the kind of emotional and mental trauma he gave me, one day I came into work on Veterans Day and my grandfather was in the 8th Air Force Division in the World War II. In honor of him, I had on one of his 8th Air Force Division ties, since he passed away about 10 years ago prior to these events. Admittedly, it was a little small on me, but I still thought it made me look clean and respectable. Other veterans who came to our store were complimenting it and congratulating me for my grandpa's service. But then my supervisor sees it. We will call him D. Yo, what's up with your tie? Oh, it was my grandfather's. He was an airline combat gunner in the 8th Division Air Force during World War II. I'd feel sorry for anyone who saw him wearing that thing. It looks ridiculous. If I had a kid, I want to let him wear it. I felt my face grow red and I glared at him with the most hateful glare I've ever given anyone. I simply said, "You're the most disgusting person I've ever met." And I walked off to do something mindless to get my mind clear. In any case, this story is about a sale I made with a gentleman who was such a cool guy. We just finalized the sale for his new 75-inch 4K TV, which included the whole works: TV insurance, all the best cables, installation, wall mounts, a full sound system, in other words, commission out of the world. I get all my paperwork finished and put my papers with all his stuff, so when the delivery team takes it out the following day, I get credited for the sale. This sale would have made me $500 in commission alone. It was a huge deal for me. I had the following day off, so I was ready to relax and enjoy my hard-earned pay. The day that I returned to work, I go to check my sales report and I see that my sale was not posted in there. My eyes widened and almost immediately panicked, and I rushed up to the sales office and asked them to search the record for any sales with a large TV, wall mount, and so on and so on. And they found it, and they saw it. It was under D's name. I was furious. I bit my fist and screamed at the top of my lungs in rage. I went into the store manager's office and screamed in rage how I wanted this fixed and I wanted my sale back. She told me how payroll was already completed for the week and all sales had been finalized, so it would be impossible for me to get the commission. I stared daggers into her and I knew it wasn't her fault. I stomped my way back down to my department and I handed my name badge and my walkie-talkie to D, and I stared him in the eyes and I said, "You will burn in hell for this," and turned to walk out, quitting that freaking job. A few years have passed and I am now an auditor for a credit company. I shuffle through some clients' papers to see who I need to review the accounts of, and I find D's name on one of the papers. My eyes widened and I grinned. Not just a normal grin, but the kind of grin the Grinch gave when he devised the disgustingly horrible plan. I looked through his file and saw that he had filed for a mortgage loan a month previously. It was a huge loan that equaled $350,000, and at the moment it was pre-approved, but pending final review since it was such a huge amount. I smiled as I looked into his file, and I remembered how often he boasted at work how his parents had basically paid for everything up until this point where he was 27. Sad, I know. Well, after I had finished looking through his estimated earnings, I noticed he failed to mention the part where his parents would be paying for him to live at. Because of this, all the things that he listed under his name for financial collateral, his car, his inflated bank account, his credit score that was shot through the roof due to his parents paying all his bills and credit cards, basically anything he could list that could make him look financially stable. After this, I marked all those items as invalid properties for the client to submit because, lawfully, they are the property of his parents and not his. I submitted my report and a little bit later reviewed his files. His credit score went from an 800 to a 300, and his file marked him as basically penniless. His loan was resubmitted and denied, and now any loans or credits he tries to submit are now immediately flagged due to his failure to submit proper financial reports. This means that basically he will never be approved for any credit cards, mortgage loans. Hell, even if he wanted an apartment, no landlord would ever approve someone with a new financial profile he had. I single-handedly ruined his chances of ever being able to live anywhere but with someone else as a roommate or on the street. For that reason, I wake up almost every morning with a large grin and a warm cup of coffee, knowing my world is at peace and balance is restored to my universe. Alright, circa 2014, I worked for a large movie theater chain in a small Midwestern city. Job was pretty awesome outside of the poor pay and essentially no way to move up. I like to think I'm good in my job and I try my hardest no matter where I work. In this particular situation, I was one of the most tenured employees at the theater save for two other folks who had worked there part-time on a side and had full-time jobs elsewhere. So for the sake of this story, I need to tell you about Jane. Not actual name. Jane started working for the theater 2 months before me. They worked elsewhere as a supervisor and were looking to move up at the theater. Right after I started, one of the managers left to work at a different theater and the supervisor moved up. We had two managers. One general manager, basically the highest level at the theater, and the supervisor who is a manager in training. This is important. Jane somehow got the supervisor position even though there was another person who essentially was promised the position due to their continued service at the theater for almost 8 years. There were rumors about Jane sleeping with the GM when she started and this situation got them going again. I didn't care too much because why would I? I am but a lowly peon in a corporate machine. Anyways, Jane moved up and the tenured crew member left the company because they got screwed over. Once Jane moved up, we had a whole meeting about her moving up and how the theater focuses on professionalism and ensuring no favoritism was happening, specifically referencing how normal crew members shouldn't fraternize outside of work with management. Jane didn't really listen to that though. She continued to hang out with the crew members who were mostly underage and would do various things like go drinking with minors, taking them to bars and buying them drinks, or simply buying alcohol at a store and letting them drink at her house. I honestly have no issue with a drinking at home deal, just adding some context, as well as smoke weed with them and post pictures on Instagram. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention Jane had a secret Instagram where they would post pictures of themselves with their friends from the theater. They chose Instagram because none of their family or their boyfriend used Instagram and no one would know, right? Even more damning was her relationship with a 19-year-old that worked at the theater. She had a boyfriend who had been with her for years and honestly supported her for all intents and purposes. Not only did she have a 19-year-old side piece, but also was messing around with a 17-year-old. I even caught them messing around in the break room one time. She essentially threatened me with my job if I told anyone. Honestly, she could have just told me to please be quiet and I would have just judged her silently. Fast forward about a year or so and another one of the managers left for a new job. Jane obviously moved up and someone else took the supervisor position. Now, I won't go into too much details, but despite my tenure and performance, I was looked over for the promotion. A newer crew member who was really good friends with Jane got the position over me. This was confirmed by the other manager who let me know that Jane was definitely in good with a GM, who ultimately made the final decision. That being said, I was beginning to sour for making minimum wage for years at a job that couldn't give a damn about my efforts and continued performance. That being said, I was preparing for an exit. Before I get into my exit, it's important to note that Jane had and most likely still has a problem with me. I have talked about some issues I had with her, but I never escalated or even confronted her about anything she did to me up to this point. I honestly left it be, but I didn't like her, and the fact that I didn't like her or play along with her nonsense infuriated her, so much to the point where she made my life hell at the theater. When she was a supervisor, she didn't have much power, but when she became manager, she began giving me bad shifts, convincing people that I was weird and to avoid me. I mean, I am weird, but not like avoid me weird. Threatening me physically, threatening my job. Her and her gang of misfit jerks also slashed my tires. I have no solid proof, but my car was parked in the employee lot, and only employees can get in. Beyond that, she also made fun of my girlfriend, now my wife, for having an invisible illness, MS. She would make her life hell because she had a disability and had some minor limitations. Add together all of this, plus my girlfriend went off to college, plus getting looked over for the promotion, suffice it to say, I found a new job. I had a few close friends at the theater, including my now wife, who I met while working there. Silver lining, right? I had let a few of them know about the new job, but told them to keep it on the DL since it was still 2 weeks away. I had put my 2 weeks in with a GM and asked that he also keep it on the DL since Jane and her posse would mess with me. I told him that I wanted to tell everyone myself, so I kept him quiet. Now, the important thing about my new job is that it essentially paid me double my wages from the theater. All my friends were stoked for me. I was taking a job that would also have me making more than the managers at the theater, but also a job that put me on a better track in life. That being said, with Jane and I butting heads on multiple occasions and her track record of messing with me, she decided to get one last attack on me. She started a rumor that I was just going to call out on all my shifts the 2 weeks before my new job started. With her last act of revenge in motion, the GM approached me and let me know that he wouldn't be scheduling me the last 2 weeks. I tried to explain to him that the rumors were nonsense, that I needed to work because it would be my only source of income. I told him that Jane started the rumor and I started to tell him all of the other stuff as well. He of course didn't believe me and told me that Jane wouldn't do what I was saying she would do. So it was her word versus mine. I contacted my new job, who let me know that my start date was firm and that their budget wouldn't allow me to start until 2 weeks later as originally planned. Now here I am, essentially jobless for 2 weeks. Now I was upset, but also I was lucky. I was still living with my family and didn't have to pay rent. So I sucked it up and essentially told myself that I would just take a forced 2-week vacation. But Jane didn't stop there. She escalated again by having one of her cronies call my new job and tell them that I just got fired. I was luckily able to talk down to my new boss by letting him know that this wasn't the case, that I put my 2 weeks in and everything else. But that was the last straw. I left my last day at the theater, and while it was sad and I was upset that I wouldn't be able to work out the last 2 weeks of my job that I had for years, I was focused and determined on revenge. Rule number 1 of living a secret life and having a secret Instagram is not to add everyone and their mother to their page. I had a friend of a friend who also didn't care for Jane. Let's call him Joe. Joe and I had gone to high school together and briefly worked at the theater together. He and Jane were part of the same group at the theater until they had a small falling out. Nothing crazy, but he wasn't exactly happy with her. I talked to Joe and we discussed my issues with Jane over some lunch that I bought for him. Food is the key to all revenge plots. Once we ate and discussed my problems with Jane, I asked for his help. I needed access to her Instagram. The secret one. Showing her hanging out with underage employees, drinking alcohol, and smoking weed with them. And also some mushy posts about her 19-year-old boyfriend, as well as some moderately racy photos with her 17-year-old fling. With very little discussion, he gave me full access. I took screenshots of essentially everything. We are talking 2 to 3 years worth of illicit and moderately illegal activity. More than enough to get her fired and to raise some questions in her relationship. I took the screenshots and I printed them on the most high-quality paper/material that CVS had to offer. I also copied a few flash drives for good measures. I purchased 2 yellow padded envelopes, can never be too safe, and I filled them both with copies of all the posts. As well, I included a note in each one for the appropriate parties. One of the envelopes was taped to the back door of the theater. There was somewhat of a blind spot, so I pulled into the parking lot from the rear and snuck around the corner Mission Impossible style to tip the envelope to the back door. On it was a GM's name, as well as a letter. I merely stated that one of their managers had a secret Instagram was a lot of damning evidence for not only favoritism, but also fraternizing with underage employees among other wrongdoings. In the letter, I also requested her immediate termination, or the information will be provided to the district manager as well as our corporate office. I made sure to put it somewhere that GM would see on his morning sweep when he opened the theater. The second folder and letter was delivered to her home by Joe. Joe agreed to this as I knew Jane's schedule and had a good idea of when she would be gone, and he knew where she lived from previous hangouts. With both folders delivered, it was only a matter of time. Before I knew it, I was receiving death threats from Jane's gang. All of them saying that they knew it was me and that Jane was going to come after me, that she never did anything to deserve this. It didn't matter to me, of course. I no longer worked there and would hopefully never have to deal with them again. From what I heard, she was taken into the main office of the theater and the GM let her have it. He ultimately had to fire her because there was very clear proof that she was in direct violation of many of the rules and conditions of her employment. As well, her boyfriend was proof in hand, kicked her out of his home. Last I heard, she moved farther north and hasn't held down a solid job since. Her family didn't want much to do with her once everything came out with her cheating on her boyfriend. Also, the part about fooling around with a 17-year-old tends not to sit well. In the end, I started my new job without fail and moved on from that place. Haven't seen much of anyone from there since.